Okay, another great video chat with our female uphill athlete coaches. We're doing a series on just questions on women's training and differences, support mechanisms, all that. And we're going to dive into our next question, and it revolves around adjustments for reproductive health. So, of course, one of the most significant physical differences between women and men is our reproductive cycle, associated hormone fluctuations, certain percentages of hormones, ability to bear children, which creates significant need to adjust training, pre and postpartum considerations for training relative to all those hormonal cycles, including the end of our reproductive life being menopause and being postmenopause. We have 3 really amazing resources right here. Maya's had her own experiences. She's younger on the spectrum and still training and learning from a lot of new knowledge. Nikki is a mom, and well, I'm older, so I get that post-menopause part. Anyway, why don't we jump in and share some of our what we've learned, what we've adapted, and what we've shared with people. Maya, feel like starting?
I'll start on the young end. I feel like I actually have the least amount to say on this, as I am still learning so much. I was mentioning earlier before we had this chat how little knowledge is really taught towards for women for this. So I kind of feel like I'm learning as I go. Obviously, I work with a lot of different females as athletes, and I learn from them. We adjust training. I think it's great when there's open dialogue. I love hearing what they have to say and their experiences with training and their cycles and whatnot. So I am learning from them. I learned from Carolyn. I'm sure I'm going to be learning from Nikki. I think it's great. But this is where my age, I feel like, is a limitation for me, since I just don't have as much life experience.
I'm impressed it's even on your radar at 27. I mean, I think the first thing that comes up for me when you bring up this topic is how out of touch I've more or less been with this until it really started impacting my life in a very direct way. But even the notion of keeping track of my cycle and knowing a little bit about hormones and what's high and what's low and the different phases of a cycle, this is all relatively new to me and new on my radar as an athlete, and how these are pretty significant impacts as athletes to deal with. And really the onus would be on us to pay attention to this stuff. But I think it, as we talked about, hasn't been terribly accessible or in the limelight in any sort of way. So I think this might be a newer idea for a lot of women to be paying attention to. So
I'm glad to hear it's new for you too, in some ways. Yeah. I'm always like, oh no, I don't know anything. But I think you're right. A lot of women are in that boat of not realizing how much it can really impact your performance. Mm-hmm. Carolyn, what are your thoughts?
Oh, so I get to get like because I'm older. It's literally just because of how many laps are on the sun and kind of my personality in general, and that women's health, and I should say, and then lack of science study and research has been a pet peeve of mine for decades. But you're absolutely right. I would say the majority of women don't realize it's not out there. That the hormones affect their training cycle. Massive lack of education, Nikki, for women such as yourself, what even the body goes through when you become pregnant, adaptations, adjustments. So, one thing, I've worked with a lot of women pre and postpartum, and it cheeses me off that someone blows an ACL and gets, 8 weeks, multiple months of PT, all of this stuff, and a woman goes through a trauma of vaginal childbirth or C-section and is given a baby and sent home without any guidance. That is shifting. So we now have, those tools that women may need: pelvic floor, PT, diastasis recti, issues, so that they can get back to sport and living their life and not injure themselves. I've had other women that I've talked to about training through their cycle. Women are super hard on themselves when they underperform. And when you are pre-set period and progesterone levels are high, all of the things that happen to our body hormonally, you just can't. You are not as efficient a machine. You're getting ready to potentially have like a fertilized egg, just like to take care of. So the body slows down, you eat more, you're more tired, you have inflammation. And so women are hard on themselves. I'm like, look, what we're going to do, I used to do this to the best of my ability, is, harder climbs, expeditions I was going on, I would do my best to kind of map it around my cycle so I could perform when I need to. Or, I know how many months and years cumulatively I've spent, menstruating in the backcountry, which is all kinds of fun. But just knowing all that, knowing all that, being able to support women and be like, there's a reason behind all this, and tracking their cycle and understanding it and setting themselves up for success where they can is, it's massive. So there's a lot we can do. And even just having this conversation opens the door for women to be like, it's not just me.
Yeah.
Right.
Even just right now, I have things going in my head. I'm like, I want to know more about how birth control affects all this, because that's the stage of life I'm in, right? Like, how is this then another layer of impacting just like the basic science we sort of understand? Yeah, that's the question that pops in my head. I don't have an answer.
You and I can have a conversation about that. I have volumes of information, so we'll talk.
And I think admittedly, the reason I haven't paid a lot of attention to it, which I'm wondering if it's true for you too, is that I didn't really give a lot of credit to what hormones do. Like you hear about it and I'm like, oh, it's not really doing that much, or this is overstated, or people are kind of overemphasizing this as something that's affecting. But a good thing to keep in mind is it's these hormones that are amazingly allowing women to grow humans in their body. And it grows a placenta, it grows an organ. So to say hormones aren't terribly impactful is not a correct statement. These are like life-altering, life-creating functions going on in our body. So it's definitely worth considering.
I've been that way my whole life with sport. Like, doesn't matter. Oh, I'm on my period right now. Who cares? Maybe that goes back to proving ourselves, right?
Yeah.
The male atmosphere, just the way we've been raised. Like, doesn't matter. I'm tough. I'll be fine. Because there is that dialogue of like, you're on your period. Like, that's why you're in a mood. That's why you're weak. So if you're a competitive female, I think we all are, like, you're going to be like, no, absolutely not. Like, I'm fine. And you don't learn. Why would you learn about something you kind of want to ignore?
No question.
It was in phases, that I realized all the things I've realized through my life. And, it just, I always come from a scientific place, and I pushed and I'm stubborn and always trying to kick the boys' asses, all the things. And I wouldn't cut myself a lot of slack, but I would, at least from a scientific standpoint. And I would read the journals and see the thing and be like, okay, I'm going to be tough and they'll be slightly less tough. And then that was my internal recorder. Honestly, women, Nikki, the fact that you can grow a human and you give birth to a child, hands down, if you want to talk about the stronger gender, that is a massive feat. Like, right?
Yeah. It is. It's amazing. It's really, human bodies are incredible. Growing a human being in that capacity. And I'm right now about 34 weeks pregnant, and I can attest that the hormones are real as I cry almost on a daily basis. And it will often be, I'll be sitting there crying and actually not feel any sadness. I just have tears coming out of my face because my hormones are wacky. But I'm trying to be gracious with myself. I have to avoid watching videos of I went down some rabbit hole of watching videos of children that couldn't see, and they put glasses on for the first time and they can see their moms. And I was like, I cannot watch
that would make me cry. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Or hearing aids in little babies and they can hear for the first time. If you guys want to get emotional, that's where you go.
That's where
but even shows like American Ninja Warrior make me cry right now. So who knows? There's the standards are quite low.
Okay.
See, I mean, there you go. Hormones.
Yes. Hormones,
I know when we get into our female alpha group, we do conversations about this a lot, but just educating women, like energies are higher when estrogens, high at the beginning of your cycle and drops, towards the end of the cycle, and understanding, I think Maya was, might have been referring to the podcast that maybe Nikki had sent to Scott, the science of hormones and tendons and ligaments, protecting our musculature.
Mind-blowing information for me.
Right? You're like, what? That makes a lot of sense.
That's why I have tendonitis everywhere. Okay, good to know.
And Karen, I'm curious, in your studying, like you've kind of done a deep dive in this. I mean, my first introduction was there was 2 phases of a woman's cycle, which was like the follicular and the luteal phase.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But then it's like the more I dive deep, there's really more like 7 phases. I mean, it's very specific, and really specific things are occurring at certain times, like the estrogen peaking when we ovulate, and then the progesterone peaking in that luteal phase. I think that's right. Where, I mean, there's just like big things happening and very specific things happening along the way. And I'm curious if how that's been for you in your exploration of this topic.
Well, it's, I don't tend to go super rabbit hole on a lot of that with athletes, because it gets a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I look at it a little bit more in like that cycle and phase. And what's also fascinating is to understand how this shifts, because every woman's different.
Right.
People have different length cycles. Some people are on birth control, which kind of birth control. And so it starts to change things. So a lot of times I'll ask people, again, just like to trust themselves and their intuition, and how does your body feel? If you're not tracking your cycle, track it. How many days, pretty much, where are you? Are you at 26? Are you at 28? I mean, I was literally put a P on the calendar, 28 days later, put a P on the calendar. And fortunately, and I started observing that when I was younger, and you really can start to feel like energy shifts. You can feel almost when you ovulate. The lowest energy time for most women is, that progesterone peaks, and then right before you actually menstruate, estrogen just like charges back up again. And so everyone's like, whoa, 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 whoa. And then we kind of zoom out after menstruation, and we're high performance as the progesterone starts to drop. But some people also have severe PMS, and that affects it. Mm-hmm. So I try not to get too sciencey, but I do try to encourage women, track your cycle, listen to your intuition about how you're feeling. We do need to think about things like, iron deficiencies with women. This is kind of going through all that stuff and giving people that power to really, it's not excuse, it's self-assessing. And then I'll start to talk to them a little bit more about how it works scientifically if they're interested. And then we start talking a little bit about how adrenals and thyroid and cortisol levels start mapping in there as well. So that starts messing with us too. So why we need adequate sleep, why we don't want to overreach and overtrain, why if we get into a cycle of amenorrhea or REDS, the female triad, they now have all these new terms for it, what's happening there and why we need to correct that. So it's just volumes of potential study and science and research, but it's really great to crack that book open for all of us to start having that conversation with our athletes.
I need to start reading like right now. I feel like I'm behind on all this info. You've got a lifetime. Remember, it's only because I'm like, I got a few decades on you that I know all this stuff. And we'll catch up. I promise.
Yeah.
It's cool. There's a lot of information out there.
I think too, I was thinking about how I forget at what point in the cycle this occurs or what hormone affects this, but maybe it is when you're ovulating, but there's like a 30% more of a likelihood that you could tear soft tissue because of that relaxin hormone comes into play. Like I know from being pregnant, I had a bunch of SI joint pain because your pelvis basically relaxes and it creates all sorts of problems for pregnant women because there's just this like lax in the pelvis. So I was at one point in my pregnancy, couldn't do any running, and even downhill hiking hurt so badly. And then somewhere along the way, it completely normalized. But I do know that that hormone comes into play just for women going through their cycle normally. So it's even being attuned to knowing when maybe you don't go do something where you have a higher potential of tearing your ACL, or just having that on your radar even. I think like implications like that are important.
The science is fascinating. And then you map in like, okay, pregnant women and relaxin levels go high. I really love that they call the hormone relaxin.
Yes.
That's really fascinating. I mean, because
Yes.
it's interesting because it's systemic too, right? Like it's all the connective tissue in your body. So like it isn't like it targets just one area. So, that's an issue. It's an issue through our cycle. And then if you add in, if a person is hypermobile already, they have joint laxity, if it's a woman who isn't regularly like strength training, so they don't have as much joint stability and as much stress on tendons and ligaments to strengthen them, yeah, then that risk of, like you said, like ACL from that article, that podcast, ACL injuries, joint injuries, tendonitis, like Maya,
Right.
it's so much higher in women.
Mm-hmm.
From all of that. It's fascinating. We're learning so much modern, even in like the last 10 years, things have shifted and still are. I'm excited that so much more research is happening.
Yeah.
So we have a lot to talk about.
Yes.
We do.
I know this is such a dense topic. There's so many subcategories.
Yeah.
I mean, Carol, do you want to hit on the menopause zone?
Oh my, yeah. I don't know how deep we want to go in that, how long we want to record. But I think some of the biggest things I can say for empowering women when they start getting there is to understand first that we peak for hormone and reproduction somewhere around like age 25. Doesn't mean we can't have children for many, many years, but hormonal peaks in most women around that age. And then we actually plateau for a while. And then for women, depending on genetics, lifestyle, all the things, there's sort of a decline that starts in our 30s and it's slow and steady. So we're asymptomatic. We don't realize it. Menopause doesn't just happen. So somewhere in our lifespan, it can be some women start even in their late 30s, early 40s. More often, it's mid 40s and later. You start having some symptoms that you'll write off as other things. You'll miss a period. You'll feel a little tired. So the list of symptoms that you can experience is fairly massive. It's big, and don't write it off. It's just like all the other things women do. And I am one of those people who is very comfortable saying, like, because sometimes when you do a lot of elite sports and you do a lot of these things, people kind of put you on a pedestal, or they look up to you, or they respect your opinion. And in that case, they'll be like, hot flashes, night sweats to the point I couldn't sleep, but for 2 to 3 hours a night. I've never had anxiety. I'd have moments of anxiety, moodiness, lack of energy, unstable blood sugar. Let's see, let me keep going. Oh yeah, vaginal dryness, painful sex, loss of libido. Like it all happens. And we have tools. There are ways to manage this, both, depending on the individual and their choices, from a clinical Western standpoint to a more complementary, like seeing an ND, some sort of hormonal support, sleep support, getting blood tests done so you know where your hormones are, getting cortisol level checked, thyroid level checked, like open the box, find a really good doc, OBGYN team, talk to friends, and realize that the reason we want to deal with it now is that we are living longer. So if a woman hits menopause in her 50s, which is like postmenopausal, your hormones are, we have an increased risk in cardiovascular disease, bone density issues, certain types of cancer. If our lifespan was normally 45 to 50 years as a Homo sapien, there's a reason menopause happens then. But if we're tacking 30 years onto that, and we're at higher risk for all these other things, it's a thing that we need to address and support women. There's also nutritional changes to help with muscle wasting issues. I was going through that. Increased protein and leucine levels for a postmenopausal woman. So it's big, but there are a lot of tools out there and a lot that can be done. And I always just encourage people, don't just like all what we talked about with younger women, pregnant women, don't downplay it. Get in and get some help, because there is a lot more information out there. And yeah, it can kick your ass. And I'll be honest, I was getting my ass kicked for a while, but got some help and it's a lot better. So, still here, still doing it.
Sounds brutal. It really does.
Yeah. But and every woman's different. Everyone's going to experience it at a different time, different severity, different, which is, I think, one of the other pieces we want to honor. Some people don't have a lot of issues, and I was lucky. The rest of my life, I've had almost zero issues with any sort of hormonal thing, training. It was all pretty easy, normal, very little PMS, blah, 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 blah. So I used to tell my husband, this is what I get for like 35 years of it being easy. Like now it's going to be a little harder.
Oh,
that's just me being funny, but
yes.
it's just kind of the nature of my beast. But yeah, so that's what I would say to women. There's help to be had out there. Don't just feel like you have to suck it up and suffer.
Right. Because the other piece of all this is like the stigma component of it being a very closed door. I mean, just you don't hear a lot of people speaking to it or vocalizing it or expressing overt concern about this sort of stuff. So
it's really true. And women don't feel comfortable even saying like menopause.
Right.
Like it's like we don't talk about that. Or if there's lack of now some kind of worth because you've ended your, menstrual, and you're just going to be an old crone. It's like, or what am I?
No.
Yeah, it's like, it's kind of funny to think about that, right? Oh, yeah. But I think there's a lot of societal stigma with it. Yeah. So just allowing people to feel comfortable to have that conversation is, I think, super important. But that was a good chat.
What a good chat.
Yes.